Yeah, today's topic is technology and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. And in terms of understanding this discussion, I want to touch upon, I think, three different areas to help us better understand why I chose this topic, but more importantly, why I think it's important for us understanding some of the geopolitical tensions within the region. So first, I want to touch about what technologies I mean. Second, what are some of the institutions that have emerged to try and compete or outcompete in this particular area? And then three, maybe talk about this technology and the geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific and what does it mean for the region's evolution. So in terms of technology, I think the broader and most important technologies that we're thinking about really started in about 2007 or 17, 2016, when we were having a lot of discussions about 5G technologies, about the role of Huawei in building our telecommunication systems, and the use of something called dual-use technologies. So semiconductors that are produced, for example, by the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. These very, very high-tech semiconductors are used in everything from iPhones to fighter planes. So they're really exciting, they're very powerful, and they're very useful. And there was great concern about China's PLA, People's Liberation Army, using these kinds of technologies to very, very quickly modernize their military so that they could really compete head-to-head, toe-to-toe with their primary peer competitor, as they understand it, the United States. Some other important areas, though, as well, I think are really important, is not just thinking about 5G and semiconductors, but thinking about digital infrastructure and the standards that will emerge as these technologies become widely available to this region, but also the global region. Why this is important is that basically the country or countries that make the rules for the digital economy, make the rules for cellular technologies, will reap the most benefits in terms of financial benefits, but also creating the rules and regulations of how these technologies are going to be used. So if we try to understand this in terms of something that we all use every day, and that's the internet, and we think about all the internet protocols that are out there, HTTPS, and how we use the idea of websites, how we use the idea of IP protocols. All of this digital infrastructure was really produced in the United States, and as a result, they evolved and they developed with a U.S. market in mind, and then they were gradually adopted by, of course, most other countries. Now, we see the tensions in terms of technology and things like the internet in terms of thinking about something called cyber sovereignty. So countries like the United States have an idea of cyber sovereignty, but it's very, very, very different than, I think, China and Russia, who really want to ensure that the internet space is not a space without government control and the ability for the government to shape what is being seen and how the internet is being used in their countries. So when I'm talking about the digital architecture and technology, I'm talking about also the standards that were going to be produced and used to use these technologies for commerce, for governance, and for privacy. And that's important. So I mentioned 5G technology. We'll probably move into 6G. I mentioned semiconductors. I mentioned digital standards. AI is another important area. So artificial intelligence, but also augmented intelligence. These are forms of computer programming that will help us really fundamentally change how we produce knowledge and how we engage in problem solving. And there's a great new book by it's called The Age of AI by Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt. And they write very much, and I think it's a quite clear-eyed view of the world, of how AI is going to fundamentally shape how we think about governance, how we think about privacy, how we think about problem solving. It will produce new technologies, from computer technologies to biotechnologies and building drugs, vaccines. So we've seen that AI has been used in producing some of the vaccines that we've used during the COVID pandemic. So AI is another area when we're talking about technology and competition in the Indo-Pacific. Is the country that is the first mover on AI, that will have the most powerful AI technologies, will likely be able to produce the new technologies, synthetic technologies, biotechnologies, and other forms of technologies that will be used to produce value, produce wealth, to modernize their economies, to make their societies more healthy, but also to shape governance, to shape privacy issues, and of course to engage in security operations. Some of the challenges with this particular area is AI problem solving gets us to an answer, and in many ways we don't know how it got from A to Z. And this creates challenges in terms of the fundamentals of understanding artificial intelligence and its impact on societies and its ability to make decisions. Another area that I think is becoming more critical in terms of technology in the Indo-Pacific is quantum computing. And I think most of us, probably the oldest person on this call, probably remember the old Commodore 64 or VIC-20 computer where you had Eleanor would definitely not know this, but you had a cassette tape that you plugged in and it took about 10 minutes to upload a very, very simple program. But now with our 5G technologies, it takes 2 seconds to upload a very sophisticated program. So quantum computing is a kind of form of high-speed calculation, and it creates the ability to calculate and solve problems at extremely high speeds in a very I don't want to say secreted, but protected environment. It's very hard to decode, if not impossible, the quantum computing algorithms. So this is another area that I think we're competing in, and the competition is primarily between China and the United States, but there are also other hubs of competition. So Canada is one of the leaders. Japan is working very hard. South Korea is working hard. Of course, Germany is working hard. But in terms of the biggest competitors, it is really the United States and China. For different reasons. The United States has huge and very wealthy and very global social media companies that have a huge amount of data, but that data is used by the businesses to produce their wealth. In the Chinese context, most people use a digital device called WeChat, and the WeChat is, you can do everything with WeChat. You can buy your movie tickets, your airplane tickets, your train tickets, going in and out of the grocery store. You can do everything with it. So in the Chinese context, people, even if the average Chinese engaged with it 10 times a day, so that would be 14 billion data points a day, and you times that by 365, you can see that China is very, very wealthy in terms of the data it can use to start to refine its AI technologies and other technologies. So this is really another area that I think that we're competing with, and it's going to be important in how we think about the Indo-Pacific region, and the country or countries that are going to be the leaders in technology will probably be the leaders in shaping the region's architecture, its institutions, governance, privacy, technologies, biotechnologies. And that's really important because the leader will be able to set the rules, but also be able to produce the wealth generating ideas and technologies that will fundamentally reshape how wealth is distributed in the world. And I think this is a really important way for us to be thinking about technology in the Indo-Pacific. So the second area I want to mention is some of the institutions that are being used to protect and build resilience into these technology supply chains, but also develop the new technology supply chains. And one of the most important ones that will emerge as a primary vehicle is the so-called AUKUS agreement between the United States, Australia, and the UK. These three countries are on the same page of the book about most security issues, very deep levels of trust, and they have a strong forward-leaning presence in the Indo-Pacific. And they've agreed to cooperate on AI development, quantum computing, cybersecurity, hypersonic missiles, and there is also the nuclear submarine deal, which are not allowing the Australians to acquire nuclear weapons to be launched from submarines, but the submarines themselves are nuclear powered. And these are very, very sophisticated technologies, and the sophisticated technologies that are being transferred means that these countries will synergize and hybridize a lot of their R&D in these particular areas. And this will give them a critical mass of countries to compete with, in this case, China. And I think that's really, really important, thinking about AUKUS as a set of like-minded countries that can build a firewall in these particular technologies and use the latest innovation, the biggest markets, to drive innovation and to really out-compete, in this case, China on in these particular areas. So we've also seen the Quad, in some ways, be part of the technology and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, called the Quad, has made several agreements to start to make specific technologies, and here we're talking about 5G technology, we're talking about standards in telecommunication, and digital economy. And what the Quad countries, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, have come to the table and said, we're going to start to protect certain technologies and selectively diversify those certain technologies from and away from the Chinese market, and put them within a group of like-minded countries. And the idea is, again, to create a firewall where these technologies are primarily built and innovated and distributed to trusted partners. And that Quad represents one of those institutions aside from the AUKUS agreement. In September 2021 and March 2021 and September 2021, at the virtual and the live summit, Quad Summit, the four leaders made strong commitments to ensure that the Quad is really the central institution that's going to start to help build resilience into these technological supply chains so that they can compete more effectively with China, but also insulate them from the geopolitical problems that we're facing in the strategic competition with China. We also see a few other areas that I think the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative between Australia, India, and Japan will be important. We also see some commitment between Japan bilaterally, for example, with Singapore or with Canada or other countries, to invest in AI and quantum computing, to invest in cybersecurity. And I think these are really, really important steps in Japan's own hardening of its economic security and building strong partnerships and being part of the rule-making process in these critical technologies. My last point before we open up the floor to communication with everyone is why is this so important? And there's a common expression that we use is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of economic policy, and of course in terms of technology policies within the region. And there's a concern that if there's not a more proactive grouping of countries that can ensure that AI, quantum computing, and these other technologies I mentioned are not dominated by, or that are ensure that they're dominated by open and free societies, that it has repercussions for this region's development in terms of privacy, in terms of the place of government in economies, in terms of the standards of the digital economy, in terms of the kinds of transparency and rules that will be used to negotiate commerce moving forward. So there's a real strong sense that countries like Japan and Australia and India and the United States and Canada and Germany and others, that they really want to ensure that technology in this region is primarily dominated by like-minded countries that share similar values, that really put rule of law first, transparency first, and this is really meant to ensure that we don't see an expansion of authoritarian governance that infringes upon privacy, of preventing the use of technology to monitor citizens in inappropriate ways. And if you look at Minister Motegi's comments about economic security and AI and technology in general, there's a real clear focus on this idea that we need to develop technologies, but we need to ensure that we protect the privacy and the rights of our citizens from not only other governments, but of course their own government. And this is really a somewhat of a hypocritical aspect of the Japanese policy, because if you take a look at Japan's view on, for example, human security, they're not really supporters of the responsibility to protect our argument. They're more about the idea of about ensuring that human security is about allowing people to develop relatively free in their respective societies. So in the case of the technology in the Indo-Pacific, Japan is very much about ensuring that they're part of the rules-making process, limiting the role of government, and ensuring that technology really develops along a transparent rules-based process. So that's kind of my 3 points: understanding which technologies are important, what are the institutions, and I mentioned AUKUS and the Quad and the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative, as well as bilateral agreements, and then lastly, why it's important. And I'll just re-emphasize that if authoritarian states are the leaders in these areas, then those technologies will reflect authoritarian values and authoritarian government models. And ultimately, I think that they will have negative ramifications for freer and open societies like Japan or Australia or Canada, United States, and India. And this is why I think it's really critical, and it is a critical area of competition, perhaps the area of critical competition in the Indo-Pacific.